Hello again, class. Now we're on to the good stuff. Today we're going to be talking about a gentleman, an English gentleman by the name of William Blake, who happens to be one of my favorite literary figures of all time. To let you know the emphasis I have for William Blake, my dog is named Blake after William Blake. So he's been a very profound influence on me and my decision to become an English teacher. That being said, he is a strange fellow, and I think some of you may be going like, what is going on with this guy? But hopefully, once we talk a little bit about the background and the context, and we go through and analyze some of his work, you'll begin to see why he's so important and why he's had such a profound influence on me and many others. Okay, so we'll just do some context about William Blake here. I got a little slideshow for you, nothing like a PowerPoint to brighten up your day. So William Blake lived between 1757 and 1827. Died when he was looks like he was about 70 years old or so. Here's a quote from him. "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's." Very interesting quote. Create a system. What does he mean by that? Well, we'll figure it out. All right. So he was a simple guy. He was kind of your stereotypical starving artist type figure. He worked as an engraver and a professional artist, but he was always very poor, especially later in his life. He was considered, his life in particular was very simple and boring. He really just hung around and read books and made art and just kind of kept to himself. So a lot of people look at his life and they don't see the kind of adventure or, grandiose deeds that you would expect from what you might call a great person. But nevertheless, he was a tremendous artist and a very talented poet. And he combined these skills to create some very interesting works. The thing about him is that he claimed to see visions of angels, spirits, ghosts of kings and queens, all kinds of things. He said he saw his dead brother in a tree. Just a lot of he saw God in a tree, and his dead brother would visit him on the reg. And so he's considered, a lot of people actually look at him through the lens of maybe he was a little bit mentally ill. At the very least, he had some disassociations with the rational world, which you may or may not find problematic. Most people today, when they tell you they have visions and that type of thing, I think the tendency is to really invalidate them or to sort of dismiss them as being fringe or crazy or whatever. But nevertheless, this was a fact about his life. His work received little attention while he was living. And even when it did receive attention, most found him very weird and confusing or even insane, as I mentioned. So Blake is a romantic. He's an early romantic. And as we mentioned in the previous video, Romanticism is a movement that developed during the late 18th and early 19th centuries as a reaction against the Restoration and the Enlightenment period's focus on logic and reason. In addition, Romantic poets like Blake reacted against the social, political, and spiritual abuses during their lifetimes. The Romantics believed in the individual, the power of imagination, they believed in democracy, and they often depicted man alone, contemplating nature and working out his own destiny. Very fun. So he was a rebellious guy, especially politically. He was very rebellious. He mixed with radicals. He was kind of considered a fringe guy. And he had very strong political views that were heterodox, to say the least. He strongly criticized how the capitalist industrialized system abused its people, particularly during the early days of the Industrial Revolution, saying that the dark satanic mills left men unemployed, killed children, and forced prostitution. So he did not mince words. It's important to note that he was a devout Christian. But despite being a believer in Christianity, he also attacked the church a lot because he thought the doctrines were being misused as a form of social control meant to encourage the people to be passively obedient and to accept oppression, poverty, and inequality. So he made a distinction between the religion itself and the religious institution. He loved the religion, hated the institution. Maybe you make the same distinctions or maybe not, but it's an important thing to note when you're dealing with Blake. So he was often described as a visionary artist. He crafted a variety of poetry, paintings, drawings, and engravings throughout his life. And he's considered a mystic or a symbolist. The term mystic in the modern context, a lot of people misinterpret it. A mystic doesn't mean like hocus pocus, performing magic and that kind of stuff, although it can mean that. A mystic is really someone that deals with the mystery traditions of spirituality or religion, or even you might say the occult, or whatever, although that's another really loaded term. Um, and in order to interpret what he's really getting at, you have to really be into the symbolism. Things aren't really what they seem with Blake. If Blake is showing you a symbol, he probably means that it to represent something else, and you have to really figure out what kind of wavelength he's on. But he used his art and his poetry as a way to inspire the value of imagination instead of reason and logic. Although he really didn't decry reason and logic completely, he did feel that it had taken some steps in the wrong direction, that it assumed power that it really didn't have, and it assumed itself as the only thing worth living for, when in fact the imagination, the realm of the spiritual, all of this stuff still had a lot of validity and was not to be discarded. Here's some artwork. I love to include his artwork. First thing you notice about William Blake's artwork is that it's unlike any other artwork that you've probably ever seen before. And anytime you see a William Blake piece, like even if I see a piece of his that I didn't know he did, and there are some of them that I haven't seen, just because he was very prolific, I always know instantly that's William Blake. You can just tell by the style. His stylistic elements are very consistent, even though his body of work is very diverse. On the left here, I can't really remember the names of these works. I should have written them down. But on the left here, you have like an angel and a demon in like battle. Blake was really big on binaries. He was very interested on good and evil, innocence and experience, right and wrong, industry and nature, all the different binaries and like binary opposition and how things balanced each other and all that stuff. He's really, really into that. So this image on the left with the angel and the demon and how they kind of sort of balance each other out and represent sort of the forces of harmony, even though they are in contention with one another, that is fundamentally Blake, and it's something that you should be aware of. On the right, this is some biblical figure. I want to say it's like a John the Baptist or maybe something else, but it's some sort of like a hermit living in the woods, like crawling on his hands and knees, some sort of spiritual ascetic. And then this other one here at the bottom, this is God after he finds Adam, who has just committed a sin. It's either God or it's one of the angels. And they found Adam after his temptation and his fall. So that you can see he's the look of the angelic or godly entity here is very concerned. And Adam looks like he's had a rough night at a party, and he is enwrapped by the serpent, who is winding down his body and seems to have him trapped in some way. Here's some more images. This is God on the left as the architect of the universe, and he's holding a compass. And for Blake, the compass was the tool by which God defined the laws of reality. If you use a compass, you're circumscribing something, you're putting a circle around it, you're encompassing it with law, and that's what God is doing here. In the creation of the universe, he's shown using a compass, because that's kind of what God does. He defines the laws of reality, right? So that's what he's doing here. And this on the right, this is Isaac Newton. Doesn't really look much like Isaac Newton in any image I've ever seen, but nevertheless it is. And this is actually a very interesting sort of criticism that Blake is putting forth in a very subtle way in this painting. First of all, you see, like God, he's holding the compass. So there is a certain acknowledgement of Newton's divine function, of his sort of use of the compass being similar to God's use of the compass. But at the same time, he looks to be part of the rock that he's sitting on. He's naked. He's looking downward. He's very focused on matter and the lower dimensions of reality. And this, in Blake's view, was what science was good for. Science is good for understanding material reality, but it doesn't do much to give us any sort of existential meaning, at least not to the Romantics. Now, of course, scientists today will tell you, well, the wonder that science inspires is better than anything you could get to with spirituality and all that stuff. But that's very counter to what the Romantics thought, and you can really see that message being delivered in this painting, which is one of the reasons I like to include it. All right, next one. Ooh, yeah. Okay, so this one on the left is actually Satan. I know it doesn't look like any Satan you've ever heard of. Most people think of Satan as being a sort of cloven-hooved figure with horns on his head. But every student that brings that up and says that's what the devil is supposed to look like, I ask them, where in the Bible is the devil described as a horned entity with cloven hooves? The answer is it's not. The image of what you might describe as the sabbatic goat, or whatever you want to say, the figure of Satan as the goat with hooves, that's actually a much later invention, and it comes really due to Christianity's competition with certain pagan religions that it revered horned deities, such as Pan or Cernunnos in the Celtic mythology. And so that whole image of the devil being a horned entity doesn't come in until later. In the original form, the devil is, of course, an angel, the most beautiful angel and the most beloved of God. And so here, I think William Blake has really captured that essence of Satan. This piece is called Satan in His Original Glory. And we can see he's standing here with the various ornaments of royalty and things, and the various little spirits sort of tending to him in various different ways. He's holding the holy hand grenade of Antioch, and he's ready to go. If you didn't get that joke, you're never going to. If you did, kudos to you. If I could give you bonus points, I would. On the right, we have the great dragon and the beast from the sea. Really not sure what the beast from the sea and the great dragon are about. I think it's probably apocalyptic biblical imagery, like Book of Revelation stuff going on. But again, it shows that kind of binary forces in opposition to each other, sort of staring up and down and that kind of thing. We see him playing with color, playing with binary opposition and balance and that kind of stuff. That's a big Blake thing to do, as I mentioned. And again, you can tell his style. It's very unique. It's also really kind of captivating. There's nobody that really illustrates in this manner. Ooh, here's Eve and the serpent. This is Eve after her temptation, looking a bit too excited. And Adam over here, he's conked out. He's had a hard day. So again, I like what he's doing with color here. I think it kind of shows his versatility. It's a very beautiful image, right? Okay, so the way that he did a lot of his poems was he engraved them. And so the poems in their original form are often accompanied by illustrations in the way that we see here in these examples. And I think that's just really cool that his volumes of poetry were published this way. Now, when most people ingest his artwork or his poetry, it's separate from one another. But this is how it was packaged originally. And I just think that's very unique and it's very cool. It reminds me kind of like a graphic novel almost. Or maybe like a medieval manuscript where they illustrate the borders and things like that. But nevertheless, he was a very talented guy, and I really like the way that he presents these works. Okay, so most of what we're going to be dealing with, there are two major binary volumes of poetry that a lot of his work comes from. The first is the Songs of Innocence and Experience. And the second is the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So the Songs of Innocence and Experience were published in 1789. The Songs of Experience were combined with the Songs of Innocence in 1794. And the combined edition has the following subtitle, Showing the Two Contrary States of the Human Soul. So what is innocence? Innocence is the state into which we are born into. It's considered a positive thing. We try to protect the innocence of children, for example. But it's also, there are some negative things to it. When you're innocent, you're ignorant, you're overly trusting, you're sort of hopeful to a fault, right? When you're experienced, you're learned, you're sort of wizened by the world, but you're also more cynical and more aware of the evil of others and that sort of thing. So that's really interesting. Here's the Songs of Innocence. According to Blake, innocence is a state of genuine love and naive trust towards all humankind and an unquestioned belief in Christianity or religion. These poems present a happy world full of good and without suffering. All is in harmony. It's formatted as a children's book with joyful tones and sing-song rhymes. And the songs of experience. The state of experience marks how one can clearly see the cruelty and hypocrisy of human nature and society. These poems show the sufferings of the miserable and the poor because as a person gains experience, he also gains a fuller understanding of the power of evil, misery, and pain. This is also formatted as a children's book, but the tones are angry, fearful, and dark. So again, here's the binary, the opposition, innocence and experience, like, good, and evil, standing in opposition to each other. And each binary is valid, but neither takes precedent over the other. Innocence is valid, experience is valid. There are negatives to both, and he really wants to explore those contrary states. In fact, in some versions, in some poems, there are the same speaker speaking in this tone of innocence and the tone of experience. So, for example, The Chimney Sweeper, which is a poem we're going to read, there is an innocence version and an experience version. Or the Tiger and the Lamb. The lamb comes from the songs of innocence, the tiger from the songs of experience. They're meant to be read as a binary and sort of read together, even though they were technically published in separate volumes that are meant to be combined. So that sort of sets the stage for the William Blake stuff. Now I'm going to go through his poetry with you. Give me 1 second. All right, so we're going to start with the tiger. The tiger comes from the songs of experience. Now, when you think about a tiger, he really means, even though he spells it the wrong way, he spells it with a Y. I think that's an English spelling, or maybe it's a spelling that's fallen out of favor. But the tiger is an apex predator. It's a horrifying thing. And we know that William Blake is a religious man. And he believes that a divine creator manifested the universe and designed it with intent. And so when we consider that the creator of the universe designed it with intent, and then we look at the tiger, we have to wonder what exactly that intent is, because tigers are freaking terrifying. Maybe not quite as terrifying as bears, but a tiger is up there. I don't know, grizzly bear versus tiger, I think they'll both kill you. So I'll just go ahead and read it to you, and then we'll stop periodically and talk about it. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So first we start with the addressing of the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night. So we know he's in the forest at the nighttime when the predators are out and prowling. And then he asks a question. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Now you remember God as the one that uses the compass to define the boundaries of reality, to frame reality. So he is essentially asking the tiger, who in the hell created you? Because I want to know what they were thinking. So then here's the next one. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings did he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? So he continues to press the tiger with these questions. But there are two important mythological references here that my students often miss. The first one is, on what wings dare he aspire? This is a reference to Icarus. If you know about Greek mythology, Icarus, the son of, I believe, Daedalus. Was it Daedalus? His father was captured with him, and they were supposed to build a labyrinth, and they were imprisoned, and they were only given candles to work by. So they used the wax from the candles and the feathers from the bed to create wings for themselves so they could escape. And before they left, Daedalus told Icarus, do not fly too close to the sun, because if you do, it will melt the wax from your wings and you will fall into the ocean and die. Icarus, of course, is like, Dad, look at me. And he flies way too close to the sun. His wings melt. He falls from the sky. Boom, crashes, dies. It's a very tragic thing. It's meant as a sort of cautionary tale about crossing boundaries, going too far, right? And so it's put in here. It's, you think about it like innocence and experience. It's like, that's interesting. There's a maybe too much want for knowledge or understanding or comprehension or trying to push the envelope too much. Maybe that can be a bad thing. The next question he asks is, what the hand dare seize the fire? This mythological reference is to Prometheus, another character in Greek mythology. He was not a god, he's actually a titan. And the story of Prometheus is that Zeus created humanity, but he left them kind of in ignorance and in their animalistic state, and they were suffering a lot as a consequence. And Prometheus saw this, and he was like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you torturing these people? Like, what's the matter with you? And he went to Zeus. He's like, you got to do something about this, man. These people are living like animals. Like, they're beyond that. They're too intelligent for this. You can't do this. And Zeus says, look, man, I get your concern, but I created these people. I know how they operate. And I'm telling you right now, if I give them fire, which is what Prometheus wanted him to do, so that they would have something to cook their food with and all this, if I give them fire, they will use it to forge weapons of war and kill each other. So I'm not going to give it to them. It is better that they remain in the state of ignorance. It's very like Garden of Eden. And so Prometheus says, you're a monster. I can't believe you would do this. He waits until all the gods are asleep, and he climbs Mount Olympus and steals the fire. So that's the line. What the hand dare seize the fire? He brings the fire to human beings, gives it to them. They accept his gift, and they proceed to forge weapons of war and kill each other. So, to punish him, Zeus binds him to a rock in the middle of the ocean, where he's surrounded by like sirens and weird mermaid things, and an eagle gnaws at his liver for all eternity, like chews his organs out, and as soon as it's done, it like heals over and starts over again. Very gnarly punishment for Prometheus. Both of these are about transgressing, doing something you shouldn't do, like the act of creating a tiger, an apex predator. William Blake really feels like this is a transgression. It's going too far. God, you shouldn't have made the tiger. Why did you do it? What the hand dare seize the fire? All right, next one. And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? Continuing this asking of questions. Who is it that came up with this? Then continues to ask the question, but notice the industrial tone that this next stanza takes. What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp? Dare its deadly terrors clasp? Okay, so obviously a reference to the Industrial Revolution and the sort of manufacturing, which is itself a kind of transgression, right? So we can really see experience being conveyed here. And when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? So he's like, is God proud of this creation? Is this something that is necessary, that is considered equally as beautiful as something gentle like the lamb? And then he finishes in the same way he started. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? And that ends the tiger. It's a question about the nature of God. It raises a very important philosophical question that comes up when you discuss the nature of God, which is the problem of evil. If we consider God to be omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and the last one, omnibenevolent, meaning all-knowing, all-powerful, I'm screwing it up, all good and all present. If we consider those attributes to be the attributes of God, then how is it that evil exists? Because if God is all-powerful, then nothing can oppose his will. If he's all good, then he wouldn't create evil. If he's all-knowing, then he would know evil is going to happen and did it anyway. And so this creates a big problem. It's one of the biggest philosophical problems. And we see Blake really asking these questions that nobody really wants to ask, right? So here's the next one, the Lamb. Now this, technically you should read the Lamb first because the songs of Innocence were published first, but I like to go with the Tiger because, you know, it's a good way to start everything off. So the Lamb is like the same kind of thing, but you'll notice that even though he's asking the Lamb questions, he's asking the questions in a different way. And his tone and his attitude is very different. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? So his question now is not, good God, who created you? His question is, hey, little guy, do you know? Do you know who made you? He's like appealing to the ignorance of the lamb. And the lamb is very soft and very gentle and very trusting, right, as a lamb would be. So then he's like, all right, I'll tell you, little guy, don't worry. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. So he says, you know who it was? It was God. It was Christ, who is called a lamb himself. So you're very special, little lamb. And that's who created you. So don't worry, I've answered your question. Then he finishes with, little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. A lot less substance, really, overall, but we can see the innocence and experience being captured here. This is innocence. This poem perfectly embodies, through this animal, the lamb, the state of innocence as is explained by Blake. So to read these two poems in contrast with one another is to embrace the binary that this whole work is about, which is innocence and experience. And it raises the deep philosophical questions, such as the nature of creation and the nature of good and evil and the nature of God. Very cool stuff. Hopefully you think so. Okay, next is London. London by William Blake. This one is more about industry and modern society and the problems that he's seeing in London, where he lives. I wander through each chartered street, near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. So he starts by saying, I was walking down the street by the river. That's what that means in the first line. The Thames, it looks like it's pronounced Thames, but it's actually the Thames. It's a river in London. And he's like, I was walking down by the river, and I saw all these people with all these grumpy looks on their face, basically is what he means. Marks of weakness, marks of woe. Okay. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. Now this last line is one of the most famous lines from Blake's poetry. The mind-forged manacles I hear. It's a very, very powerful image. To get to the root of this image, we have to know, what is a manacle? A manacle is like a shackle. It's like a handcuff almost. It's something that you bind someone with. So if the manacle is mind-forged, he's basically saying these people that I'm encountering on the street in London are miserable because they have created for themselves a prison of their own mind. This is a very, very interesting idea. And if you go back, you think about Mephistopheles when he talks about hell being a place, a mental state. This is a similar idea. Hell, or the misery of these people, is created by their minds, and it's not just their natural state. It's because they've created a prison for themselves. And why? Why'd they do that? Okay. Next. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. So he's mentioning specific people who are lamenting their existence. The first one is the chimney sweeper. Now, why is the cry of the chimney sweeper appalled by the church? And why is the church blackening? Well, the chimney sweepers, a lot of people don't know this, most of them were orphans, and most of the orphanages were run by the church. So the church used child labor in the form of orphans, the church being the Anglican church at the time, used child labor in the form of orphans, and it sure didn't want to hear them crying, because what it was doing was a human rights abuse, and it didn't want to be made aware of that, so it appalled the cry of the chimney sweeper. Didn't want to hear it, right? The next one is, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Now, in order to understand this, you have to say, well, why is the soldier sighing? Why is the blood running down the walls? And what walls is it running down? The palace. So in this case, Blake is basically saying these people are suffering for the well-being of others. The people who are dying in Britain's wars are dying for the monarchy. They're dying for the nobility. They're dying for the status quo. They're not dying for themselves. I mean, there is this idea that, nationalistic protection and that kind of thing, and we're all in this together. But are we? Is the Duke sending his children to the war? Right? now we start to realize maybe he's onto something. And now to finish off the poem London, which is depressing. Most people are like, wow, this is a really depressing poem. Yeah, it is. Most canonical literature is depressing. In fact, if you're listening to this video, I challenge you to find a uplifting work of canonical literature. And I don't mean like a religious work or something like that. That doesn't count. I mean like a work of literature that is completely uplifting, that is just one big smile fest. I don't think you can do it. I've been teaching literature now for a while. I can't think of any uplifting books. I'm really trying. And even the ones that are kind of uplifting, they're always like, well, but what about this and that? And, oh, yeah, that was kind of lame. So anyway, here's the final stanza. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So this one is kind of interesting. First of all, the youthful harlot. Harlot is a prostitute. So through the midnight streets, he hears the harlots cursing, and how that curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, meaning it makes the babies cry. Why would the harlot's curse make the babies cry? Because sometimes babies are an unwanted consequence of prostitution, unfortunately. And then it says, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. A hearse is for a funeral. So he's mixing marriages and funerals, which is like two polar opposites. Similar ritual, but in a way, but two polar opposites in terms of their function. And he's talking about plagues. This is actually, and my students, when I tell you this in person, you're usually like, oh my God, this is actually a reference to STIs, to specifically syphilis, which was a big problem. So the thing about the world in which Blake lived in is that it was very prim and proper and modest on the surface, but at night it was like people were sneaking around and going to brothels and doing all this stuff. And William Blake was actually like, even though he was a religious man and he aligned with a lot of Christianity and sort of the sentiments about sexuality inherent in Christianity, he thought that the reason all this prostitution and stuff was going on is because people unnecessarily repressed themselves. And so they put down these desires they were having, and they tried to box them in and keep from acting on them. And then eventually they would just come out in the worst possible way, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. And it had really bad social consequences, like disease transmission, like unwanted pregnancy. So he's basically calling out the whole city of London and saying that your misery is a choice, is a collective choice that you all are making. Interesting suggestion. I'm not going to tell you how to take that one way or the other. You may do with it what you will. The next poem, The Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Innocence. Remember, chimney sweepers are children. So this is the voice of a child who is basically an orphan and has to sweep chimneys for a living. Now, one of the things that will happen to you when you're sweeping chimneys, it sounds like a fairly asinine position, but in actuality, it will kill you because you'll get something called black lung, you develop breathing problems and asthma and cancer and different things. A lot of these kids didn't reach adulthood. Let's just put it that way. So the chimney sweeper, Innocence. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved. So I said, hush, Tom, never mind it. For when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. Now, there's a lot of irony here. First of all, if the kid doesn't have any hair, how's he going to get it spoiled, right? And why would it matter then? Because he doesn't have any hair to begin with. But also, he refers to the Tom Dacre as having hair like a lamb's back. So there's that innocence again, that mention of the lamb. These are innocent children. They trust the people who are exploiting them, and they don't know any better, so they don't ask questions, and they just accept it. They accept their fate. And Blake is basically implying, even though this poem seems on the surface very sing-songy, like a nursery rhyme, like it's not. It's a scathing criticism, a very vitriolic and angry message directed at the church who is exploiting these children. The next one. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. So he basically is highlighting the human cost of the child labor and the chimney sweeping. These kids are dying. They're going to die. and the kid knows it, but the way he processes it is very innocent. Because then we say, and by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Okay, so he's imagining that they're going to be free and they're going to go to heaven and they're going to have a good time and do all the things that they should be doing in this life as children, like running around and playing. So even though this is a positive image, Blake is really saying this is screwed up, right? Okay. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. So this also sounds positive, but if you really think about it, like, who is the voice of the angel? It's not a real angel, it's the voice of the clergy who is using these children. They're telling them, well, don't worry that I know life is miserable now, but one day you'll get to heaven and you won't have to worry about any of this. And when you put it in that context, you can just feel like the sinking disgust that should come from an awareness of what this poem is really about. And so the final stanza. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Now, with the stage set of the terrible suffering that these children will endure, of the fact that they will die, of the fact that they're missing out on being kids, we end with Tom being happy and warm and knowing that if he just does his duty, he'll get what he really wants out of life. It's way more depressing when you consider the true meaning. That these kids, are they really going to get what they want? I mean, maybe in the sense of the afterlife, maybe, depending on if they're, the way that works. But probably they're just having their childhood robbed from them. And they're just really clinging to this hope because they have nothing else to cling to. So now let's read the Chimney Sweeper from the Songs of Experience and see how that differs. The speaker now is older, jaded, much more aware of the world and how it works. And you'll notice his tone, even though I think it's a different kid, the tone of this kid is very different. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother, say? They are both gone up to the church to pray. So we have the kid, he's stained with dirt in the snow, and he's weeping and crying, and he's, where are your father and mother? Oh, they've both gone up to the church. Well, that's kind of ironic. Why aren't they here with you? Wouldn't the really good thing to do be to be here with you instead of going up to the church? What does the church matter if you're going to abandon your child? These are all implicit questions that arise from that stanza. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. So because I was a giggly little baby and they said, oh, look, he's happy, they felt justified in selling me to an orphanage. And now they've gone back up to the church. Wow, okay. There's no BSing this kid, right? He's with it. And because I'm happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make up a heaven of our misery. So then we have, well, because I'm happy, because I'm a kid, and kids are going to play no matter what they're doing, because I display the qualities of being a happy kid, they think that they haven't done me any harm, when in actuality they have, and they've gone up to praise God and his priest and king. And then there's the direct indictment of the church, who make up a heaven of our misery. They are benefiting from my suffering. Okay, I know it's getting heavy, folks. But William Blake was tired of this crap that he was seeing every day, and you can understand why, right? And it's easy for us now, in the wake of child labor laws, to sit here and go, well, this is just very depressing. This is a very depressing subject matter. But if you think about it, William Blake had to see that stuff every day. Man, it's got to be heartbreaking. So you want to write a piece of literature that's going to wake people up to the idea that, like, hey, this isn't how you should structure things. It really isn't. All right, so now we're going to do the Garden of Love. The Garden of Love. This is one of my favorites. I can actually recite the Garden of Love from memory. It's not very long, so that's not a huge flex, but I sometimes like to do that. So I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I'd never seen. A chapel was built in the midst where I used to play on the green. So we know that the Garden of Love is a place that he used to go when he was a child. And he went there to like relive his childhood. But now instead of there being a garden, there's a chapel, like a church building there. And that may not be the worst, but then the next stanza. And the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. So I turned to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore. So he went to the chapel, and, oh, nice, a chapel, except the chapel is shut. You can't come in. You're not included. And the gates of the chapel, above them is the words, thou shalt not, which we know is a reference to the Ten Commandments, but it doesn't say thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not blah, blah, blah. It says thou shalt not, just you shan't. You're not going to do it. Do what? You're not going to do what you want to do. You're going to restrict yourself. You're going to restrict your desire. Blake thought this was wrong. He thought that the church should not encourage people to restrict their desire and to abase themselves in the way that it did. So that's a direct indictment. Even though it makes reference to the Ten Commandments, which is generally regarded very positively, he is saying, no, you are forbidding us from living the way we want to live because you want to control us, and that ain't right. All right, the final stanza. And I saw it was filled with graves and tombstones where flowers should be, and priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. So here is the final indictment. The garden that used to be full of beautiful flowers where he would play as a child is now filled with tombstones, and the priests are walking around and making their rounds, and they're binding with briars my joys and desires. So he's accusing the church of robbing the human experience of its livelihood, of its magic, of its mirth, and suppressing desire, which he does not agree with. This makes Blake a bit of a radical, especially in the Christian sense, but it is nevertheless his attitude. So we're going to end today on the Proverbs of Hell. And I love the Proverbs of Hell. I think they're so cool, but they are way out there, man. This is like hard. There's some of them I read, and I'm like, well, I don't have any idea what he's talking about. So we'll go through them, and I'll try to offer some interpretation. A proverb is like a short quip of wisdom. And so each one of these is meant to be interpreted to give you some sort of wisdom or insight about life and how it should be lived. Now, they are the Proverbs of Hell. So they have kind of a hellish sort of worldly feel to them. And this is from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So this is the one group of poems that we're reading that is not from the Songs of Innocence and Experience. All right. In seed time learn, in harvest teach, in winter enjoy. And this one confuses people, but if you think about it, seed time, that's childhood. In your childhood, you should learn. When you're an adult, you should teach. And when you're old, you should retire. Okay. The next one is drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead. I had a student say that this one actually made her cry one time because she couldn't figure it out. It could mean several things. It could mean build your progress on the progress of those that came before you. There's that old saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Could mean that. It could mean don't worry about what happened yesterday. The bones of the dead, they're dead. You can't do anything about it. You got to move forward. Could be either of those. The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Yeah, I mean, sometimes overindulging will teach you something. You think about your buddy that got really drunk at that party, like so drunk that he had the spins and he couldn't think. The next morning he woke up. What was the first thing he said? I'm never doing that again. So the road to excess leads to the palace of wisdom. He learned his lesson the hard way. Prudence, this is one of my favorites too. Prudence is a rich, ugly old maid courted by incapacity. Prudence means caution. So caution is a rich, ugly old maid courted by incapacity. Sure, you can protect your wealth with caution, but in doing so, you will forget to live. You will be incapacitated. You will be an old maid, someone who is not of any value to society. So this is actually a proverb encouraging you to take some measured risk and to be courageous, which is why I like it. He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. Kind of the same thing about the Garden of Love. If you suppress your desires, you will become monstrous. They will take you over, right? This is my all-time favorite one. The cut worm forgives the plow. It's the same thing as to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. It's talking about, like collateral damage, acceptable losses. things are going to happen over the way. You make a garden, you're going to cut a worm in half. It sucks you cut the worm in half, and I hate to tell you guys, but every worm you ever cut in half with as a kid is dead. The idea that worms grow back from their severed halves is a myth. Flatworms do, not roundworms, not earthworms. They do not. So sorry, you probably just killed a bunch of worms when you were a kid. But certain things are going to happen along the course of progress, and you just got to accept it and move on. Dip him in the river who loves water. You should acclimate to the things you're interested in. You should not divert towards something that society encourages you to do. You should, if you love water, then by all means go swimming. That's what William Blake thinks. That's what I think. Pretty smart guy. So, a fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees. It's all about perspective, isn't it? It's all about how you look at things. Some people can see things and they won't see their inherent value. Other people are wise and they understand it. So don't let perspective convince you that something is true, when in actuality, if you changed your perspective, you would see that there's another way of looking at it. He whose face gives no light shall never become a star. And that's kind of self-explanatory, right? If you don't put yourself out there, you're never going to go anywhere. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. This one is tough, but if you think about it, like, eternity is a long time, man. That's a long time. You got to do something. If you're God, you got to do something to occupy eternity. So he must love the productions of time. This is how God fills his time. This is how he keeps himself entertained. The busy bee has no time for sorrow. This one actually is real for me, because I went through a period of my life where I lost some people that were very close to me to some pretty severe illnesses. And one of the ways that I coped with that was by staying busy. I didn't take time off of work to go home and sob in my room. Now, some people that would be the right thing to do because they wouldn't be able to function. But for me, the way that I functioned through all that was I stayed busy, right? And by staying busy, I was able to better deal with my sorrow. The hours of folly are measured by the clock, but of wisdom no clock can measure. So basically, the hours that you spend screwing around doing stuff that isn't important, yeah, that's time that you're wasting. But if you spend your time on something that's worth it, it's not wasted at all, right? All wholesome food is caught without a net or a trap. Maybe some proto-vegetarian stuff going on. Maybe he's big on nature. He's big on treating animals right and stuff. Maybe he's talking about the way that you obtain your food is important, and you should try to be as ethical as possible. Interesting idea for when he was writing. Bring out number, weight, and measure in year of dearth. Dearth meaning scarcity. So when inflation is the highest it's been in 40 years, watch your pennies. Pretty basic. No bird soars too high if he soars with his own wings. Another Icarus reference, right? Because Icarus's wings were not his own. They were made of wax, and so he couldn't go very high. But if they're your own wings, they're not going to melt, so you can go as high as you want. Okay? A dead body revenges not injuries. Yeah, if the person is passed, like, don't necessarily worry about what your dad wanted you to do if your dad is gone. You're still here. Do what you want to do, right? That's pretty much what he's saying. The most sublime act is to set another before you. That's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I have to really explain that at all. If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. Interesting. Doing foolish things can teach you lessons if you would persist in them and learn the lessons. So, we have this attitude that all foolish things are worthless, not if you learn from the foolishness. Even the negative parts of your life can be learning experiences if you have the mind for it. Folly is the cloak of knavery. Shame is pride's cloak. Folly is like foolishness is the cloak of knavery. Knavery is like naivete. Shame is pride's cloak. If you're shameful, you're really prideful on the inside. Here's a great one. Prisons are built with the stones of law, brothels with bricks of religion. Basically saying that the only thing, the thing that makes these prisons and these horrible is the law. If you were less restrictive in the way you governed people, society would be better, is basically what he's trying to say. A bit of a libertarian sentiment there from William Blake. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. Now this is interesting because pride is the sin of Lucifer, right? It's considered the chief sin, the first sin, one of the worst sins, depending on the context. And yet, here he says, pride is the glory of God. So he's basically saying that there is a place for everything, even those things which are considered negative, like pride. The next one is the same. The lust of the goat is the bounty of God. Lust is not good according to religion, but if the goat does not lust, there are no more goats. So how can lust be all good, all bad, right? There has to be a purpose, a function for lust. There has to be a reason for why it exists that is beyond the devil made it happen. The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. Ah, okay, wrath of the lion, pretty nasty. But without the lion, the prey animals overbreed and they starve each other, and it's terrible. So the lion, even though it's terrible, is actually wisdom. It's actually God's wisdom exercising itself. Very interesting. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. I'll just leave that one there for you. Excess of sorrow laughs. Excess of joy weeps. Everything in excess can have the opposite of its intended effect. Sometimes there is joy and sorrow. Sometimes there is sorrow and joy, depending. The roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the raining of the stormy sea, and the destructive sword are portions of eternity, too great for the eye of man. So meaning that sometimes the things that we see as terrible are part of a bigger picture that we don't really see. So we should accept the things that we don't understand because we don't see the big picture, basically. The fox condemns the trap, not himself. Well, that may be a mistake on the part of the fox. Maybe if you get trapped, you should condemn yourself instead of the trap, right? Because maybe it was you that should have avoided the trap. That's interesting. Use your brain. How many more we got? Jeez. Woof. Okay. We'll keep going. Joys impregnate, sorrows bring forth. Okay, a bit of a childbirth reference there. Let the man wear the fell of the lion, the woman the fleece of the sheep. All right, there's a little bit of a gender binary there from Blake, but it was the 18th century. The bird a nest, the spider a web, man friendship. So friendship is man's sanctuary, as the spider's web is to the spider, as the bird's nest is to the bird. The selfish smiling fool and the sullen frowning fool shall both be thought wise, that they may be a rod. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. That's not. What is now proved was once only imagined. Ah, that's interesting. So again, emphasizing the function of the imagination. Without the imagination, you can find nothing. You cannot prove anything. So science, you think it's all logic and reason. No, you need the imagination. You need even the spirit. We'll skip over a few of these. I'll let you guys can read these on your own and try to interpret all of them. I'll just do a few more. Always be ready to speak your mind, and a base man will avoid you. That is the truth, man. If you're at a party and some idiots are talking to you, just start dropping some knowledge. They'll go away real quick. Trust me. Everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. Interesting. The eagle never lost so much time as when he submitted to learn of the crow. Don't concern yourself with things that don't involve you, and things in particular that are beneath you, because we could consider the eagle above the crow, right? The fox provides for himself, but God provides for the lion. I guess the difference here is, what's the difference between a fox and a lion? Lion is a apex predator. A fox is like it's a predator, but it hunts with its cunning. So it's much more about using your mind, and the lion doesn't really have to use its mind. It just has to catch things and eat them. Okay, a couple more. Think in the morning, act in the noon, eat in the evening, sleep in the night. Okay. Expect poison from the standing water. That's kind of like idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? If you're not doing anything, if you're not moving, you can expect your life to become poison. That one's really good, right? You never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough. That's a good point, right? You never know how many donuts is enough donuts until you've eaten too many donuts. And then you think, that was too many donuts. Let's see. If others had not been foolish, we should be so. Again, there's value in stupidity because stupidity can teach you, provided you're opening to learning. So if people in the past had not been stupid, I always think about those memes that you see on the internet. It's like, shout out to all the cavemen that died testing foods that, before we knew what was good to eat. It's a good point, right? If someone had not eaten that poisonous mushroom and died, we wouldn't know it was poisonous, unfortunately. So there is value in that, in the foolishness, which is something that's very alien to us, I think, the way that we think. Let's see. Do one more. To create a little flower is the labor of ages. Sometimes something that seems simple and quaint is actually the product of a lot of work. And so you should learn to respect the work. The best wine is oldest, the best water is the newest. You can read all these, right? These are very interesting. I'll let you finish them because this video has gone on for a while already. But check out the Proverbs of Hell and Blake's other poetry. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you gain something of this and his mystical worldview, his visionary perspective, and his overall exuberance for the joys of living and the beauty of the world in which we live. So with that being said, have an excellent week, and I will see you next time.